back. So in the second half of this session, we're going to have like two speakers. The first one would be Mr. Philip Barth. So you can see from the screen, Philip is in UK. Yeah. So after Philip, we'll have Mr. Hoi-fai to share his experience. So let's get started. So hello, Philip.
Hello there.
Okay, so I just hand over to you. So let you start your presentation, which would, I'm sure you will share your experience in creating your documentary project. So let's start.
Thank you. Hello everybody. So my name is Phil Ralph, and in 2006 I became involved in creating a verbatim theatre piece called Deep Cut. Deep Cut is the story of one family, the James family, who their daughter joined the army in 1995 when she was 17. And later in 1995, when she was just 18, she was found dead at Deep Cut Army Barracks, which is in Surrey, just outside London. And she was found dead with a single gunshot wound to the head. And the army informed the James family that her death was a suicide. 7 years later, it was revealed that not only did Cheryl James, who you may see images of, she's on the front cover of the book, Cheryl James died at Deep Cut. Not only did Cheryl die there, but 3 other people died there, 3 young men. One a few months before Cheryl, and then 2 other young men several years later in 2001 and 2002. And this became a very big scandal around about 2002 when this was revealed that there'd been 4 deaths at this army barracks. When I got involved in the story, I was approached by a theatre company in Cardiff with a very, in Wales, which is where I live, with a very loose brief about if I was interested in writing a play about the army. And Cheryl James is from Wales, and her family are from Wales. So I just arbitrarily said I would start there, and ask her family if they would be interested in talking to me. So what had happened over the years was that revelations had come out about bullying, about abuse, and all 4 families had questioned whether or not their children had in fact committed suicide, which the army and the police had asserted. When I started working on the project and I first met with Des and Doreen James, who again you will probably see pictures of throughout this, and the actors who played them in the production, it became really clear to me that this should be a piece of verbatim theatre. And I was directly influenced and inspired by 2 people who are probably there, and if they're not in the room, they will be tomorrow. Nicholas Kent from the Tricycle Theatre, who I believe spoke this morning, and the work that he did in his tribunal plays, and Robin Soames, whose verbatim work with Max Stafford Clark's Out of Joint Theatre had been hugely inspirational to me. So Nick's work, particularly with The Colour of Justice, alongside Richard Norton Taylor, a journalist from The Guardian, about the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, and Robin's work, in particular, a piece called A State Affair, which is an extraordinary piece of verbatim theatre. And so both of their work was very inspirational to me. And in particular, if I may, from my perspective, Robin's work is deeply human, deeply personal, multi-perspective. So he encompasses many, many different people within the course of each of his pieces, and they speak directly to the audience. So they tell their story directly to the audience. And in the case of Nick's work in the tribunal plays, what was inspirational to me was the ability to encompass officialdom, if you like, so institutions and institutional response to injustice. And it struck me that the deep cut story encompassed both of these worlds. So I was very fortunate that I was able to meet with Robin before I began my research process, and he was very kind in sharing some of his process with me, which became very, very useful and helpful. And I also met with Richard Norton Taylor, who was at the time the military correspondent for the Guardian newspaper, to get his take both on his tribunal plays and also on the deep cut story itself. So my process, in terms of how I did the research for the project, was initially I met with Des and Doreen James, who were Cheryl's parents. I had never done anything like this before. I trained as an actor, and I had a small digital voice recorder, and I met with them, and I sat and I turned the voice recorder on, and we just talked, and I asked them to tell me their story. And I must have spent probably in excess of 24 hours all in total talking to Des and Doreen James about their story as they took me across a period of time then which was well over 10 years. So 10, 11, 12 years. It's now 20 years since their daughter died, 22 in fact. And alongside that, I then said to them, is there anybody else you think I should speak to? And they put me in contact with friends of Cheryl. They put me in contact with journalists that they had dealt with. They put me in contact with a man who was a forensics expert, because one of the key issues around the deep cut case is that at the time of each of the 4 deaths, the local police to the army barracks did not take forensic evidence. So they did not do what you would normally do in the event of an unexplained death. They didn't take forensic evidence. They didn't interview people. They didn't lock down the sites. So the only thing that is available for all 4 of these deaths is scene of death photographs, which were not digital and were not great quality. So I spoke to a forensics expert who had seen those photographs and who recreated the deaths. Each of the circumstances of the 4 deaths are very different. And alongside this series of interviews, I also met with politicians who had lobbied on behalf of the families. Alongside all of these interviews, I was at the same time trawling the internet 12 years ago to collect documentary material, to collect reports, to collect press releases, to collect any piece of information that I could find around this story, particularly that came from official sources. I didn't seek out interviews or comment from any of the official bodies, the army, the police, any of these official bodies, because my personal feeling was they have the mouthpiece of their press departments and will issue press releases and reports until they are piling high. So I use their own words, and then the collation process, the process of actually writing the play, became a laborious process of transcribing the recorded interviews that I'd conducted, word for word. Hesitations were included, ums and ahs, speech patterns were included in my transcriptions. So I had page after page after page of these, alongside these documents. And then I began to write. And one of the things that I'm sure you will hear a lot over this 2 days, and this was Robin Soames who told me this, and I think he's absolutely right, is documentary theatre is resolutely authored theatre. There is a writer. And in some cases there are several writers, and I would argue even in the case of Nick Kent and Richard Norton Taylor's theatre, there are authors in the sense that they are choosing what to include and what to leave out. So it is mediated through the minds of an author, and so my process really became trying to kind of encompass this huge story of this injustice. Of 4 families who lost 4 children in suspicious circumstances, and the authorities who are ostensibly there to protect both those children and those families had not done their job and had arguably been corrupt and had perhaps covered up what had actually happened. And so very proudly, I delivered to the theatre company who had commissioned me my first draft, which was about that thick. And was about 150 pages long and would probably have taken 5 hours to stage. And I was very fortunate at that point to be partnered with a director, Mick Gordon, a fantastic director, who very hard-headedly said to me, "We can't put this on stage. And so you need to choose," and this is very important, particularly for deep cut, I think, whose story is this? And I think that's a very important question when looking at documentary and verbatim theatre. Whose story is being told? And so in this case, it became very clear that it was the story of Des and Doreen James and their search for the truth, for answers and for justice for their daughter's death. So that was my mediating rule as I began to edit. And we began a long process of editing and workshops with actors until the eventual production of the play, which was premiered in 2008 at the Edinburgh Festival. It ran about an hour and a quarter, astonishingly. So a very short piece of theatre. The next stage, which is very important, was that the production of the play in many respects mirrored the development and writing of the play, in the sense that the designer, Igor Vasiljev, worked with Des and Doreen James. So the play was set in their living room. And the forces of officialdom and Cheryl's friends and journalists all just walked into their living room and took over the space. And so by the end of the play, the space was awash with documents and reports and photographs. And Igor, the designer, worked with Des and Doreen James and took photos of their actual living room, so that even the set was verbatim. Down to, at one point, Des's mobile phone rings in the play, and Igor made sure it was a recording of Des's actual phone ringtone. All of which added to the sort of sense of the veracity and the kind of the weight of the truth of what we were doing, including all the reports that fell onto the stage and were awash on the stage were the actual reports. They were the facsimiles of the actual reports. And this process continued right up to the point, in fact, that when we premiered the play in Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Festival is strange in that you don't have a specific premiere date, but Des and Doreen James came to see the play in Edinburgh, and myself and the director asked them if they would be kind enough to appear in the play. So the play ends with Des and Doreen and Cheryl's friend Jonesy giving final speeches to the audience, and you might have seen some of the photos of the characters giving those final speeches. And we asked Des and Doreen if they would give those final speeches, which they did. Without fanfare and without a huge kind of introduction, they just simply stepped onto the stage and spoke their own words to the audience, which was a final, very special and important moment in making it real. And bringing it full circle, really, and ensuring that throughout the process there was real clarity for me about it's their story that's being told, and the reason for telling this story is to give them a voice that they have been denied largely throughout this process. So that was the broad sweep of putting the play together and of it being produced, and it over the years, initially I wondered whether or not it would actually change anything, and perhaps we can talk about this a little more as we go forwards, but initially it didn't change anything. The state didn't respond in any way, because the play makes some very serious accusations of corruption and cover-up. But yet, as the years have gone by, The play has been specifically instrumental in continuing not just the Jameses, but the other three families' fight for justice. And last year in 2016, 20 years after her death, there was a fresh inquest into Cheryl James's death as a direct result of the play, which I couldn't have foreseen, and I certainly couldn't have planned, but it did happen. So it's and I know from both Nick and Robin's work that it's very clear that this kind of work has a really important role to play at a time when trust in institutions and trust in journalism is at an all-time low. So it was a real privilege to work on the piece, and it continues to have an ongoing legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. So maybe are there any questions? Maybe, we just grab the chance. So as long as Phil's here, I don't know, after hearing his sharing about his devising process, are there any questions from the floor? No, not yet. No. So maybe I can ask the first questions, because as long as you talk about it is a verbatim, so it's a strict verbatim. Even you mentioned about the set and other things. So how much you're concerned, because when you talk about verbatim, you are not going to change the word from the original. But sometimes this kind of conversation is not really dramatic. It can be very boring, very drill, or too personal. So how you make it dramatic? Or is it possible, or is it necessary to be dramatic?
Obviously, because I was using, as Robin does, allowing the people to talk directly to the audience, and the story that they were telling me was extremely dramatic. And so really the aim was to put the audience in my seat as I'd sat with them. And that's why it was in their living room, and that's why the audience were always very close to the stage, and so there was a real intimacy about it. So in terms of direct drama, drama, as we know, always comes from conflict. There wasn't a huge amount of conflict in between the individual characters and actors on the stage. However, one of the things that I was able to do was discover amongst the documents transcripts of interviews and meetings. For example, that late in the play, Des and Doreen James were able to meet with the commanding officer of the barracks where their daughter died, who had arguably been negligent around the camp. And so therefore I was able to use that. So there was direct drama there. But another key, and not to steal Robin's thunder, but another key issue that a key technique that Robin kindly gave me was when you're sitting interviewing people, actually the moment that you turn a recorder on and say, I'm recording now, people tend to get very formal, and they will talk as if they're being interviewed. And he said, actually, he finds that it's the moments before the recorder goes on and after the official interview is finished, where you learn a lot more about them as people. And he's absolutely right. And I used that on many occasions in the play of, I was sitting in Des and Doreen's house recording, and then Doreen would come in to say that, oh, Des, your phone's ringing, and I brought you some bottles of water because, you're talking a lot, so you might... So I was able to use all of those moments to create a life and to keep things moving. And then the other thing in terms of the drama was really I didn't want it to be a polemic. So I didn't want it to be a piece that only took one position. I wanted it to be a debate, because I believe that that's what this kind of theatre should offer, is a challenge and a debate. And so throughout the play, the Jameses would take one position, which is their position about their daughter and the circumstances around her death. And then I would bring in another character from officialdom. So it would be the lawyer who was asked to do an inquiry into the case. he would come in and give the opposite opinion. Then opposing him would be a journalist who would give the opposite take on it. Then the forensics guy would give an opposite take. So the drama came not necessarily from direct conflict between the characters, but between the differing positions that they took and that they took to telling the story. Yeah.
Thank you. So any other questions? It's a rare chance to ask directly to Phil.
As we have said, we can help translate.
Yes, if anyone would like to ask
Cantonese.
in Cantonese or Mandarin, we're going to translate. And so, no, really quiet. Oh, yes, I've got 1 second properly. Okay, we've got the first question from the audience.
You mentioned that.
Sorry, the mic is not.
Sorry.
Make sure. Phil.
Hi, Ralph. You have mentioned that one of the purpose of the theatrical production is to inspire debates, and I'm really excited about it. And would you tell us more how the drama sparks off debates on the spot?
Yeah. For me, there's the reason why this kind of theatre does that is directly linked to what's happened to journalism. And I can't speak for journalism in Hong Kong, but certainly over here, there's a really serious problem around our trust in journalism. And of course, a certain orange-coloured gentleman in the United States is causing a lot of that, I think. So what verbatim theatre can do in inspiring debate, and I think this is directly linked to the veracity of the truth of what you're presenting, is to really lay out arguments and to give people a voice and characters on the stage a voice, and to be as even-handed as it's possible to be in an evening of theatre, to enable the audience to be an active participant in the evening and not simply a passive observer. And so part and parcel of the production, and the reason it worked so well, was because the direct address, the speaking directly to an audience, implies that you are being part of this evening, and you should have a feeling, have an opinion, take a position, and therefore you're active in that debate. And one of the things that was very clear from audiences as they came out of Deep Cut was they really wanted to talk about it, and they really wanted to know more. And often the questions that they would ask me and the cast members was, did that really happen? Is that really true? You know, and I think that does come from this sense of we don't trust journalism, we don't trust what we're told anymore. And so I think, and then we were able to talk to them and say, yes, it absolutely was, and here's our sources, and here's what we've got, and here's what we know. And so I know that happens across the board at verbatim theatre pieces that I've seen in the past, and certainly at the Tricycle with Nick's work, it was part and parcel of what he was doing in presenting the tribunals, was putting the audience in an active role in a situation where normally they wouldn't be allowed that active role. And so I think that's how debate is inspired through this work.
Thank you. So we have got the next questions.
Hi. You just mentioned, your production, when you collect all documents, is almost 5 hours, right? But how come at the end, it is only 1 hour and 50 minutes, or a very short production? How could you do that,
I'm not sure myself, to be honest. It took a lot of work. I haven't written another verbatim play since Deep Cut, but I've continued to work with people's stories. And I've written film scripts around this work. One about the Lockerbie bombing in 1988 over Scotland. One about the 7/7 terrorist attacks. And one of the things that is consistent throughout this kind of work is the deeper that the author and the production team get into the story, the harder it is for you to discern what is an important vital fact and a fact that tells the story. And there's a difference between those two. So that was why it was so useful and valuable to me to have the collaborator of my director, Mick Gordon, because I would be saying, look, it's so important that the audience know this fact. And he would say, we already know that. We know it because you've told us half an hour ago. And telling us again and again and again doesn't make us believe it anymore. We already believe it. And so part of that editing process, which again, I'm sure that Nick will talk about in respect to his tribunal plays and Robin, is about discerning what pieces of information tell the story and how much information people are able to process so that they can feel like they have enough information to make their own minds up and to have that debate. It's not easy. It's not an easy process. And it's also not an easy process, and this is another issue, an ethical issue around verbatim theatre for me. It's not an easy process in working with the people whose stories you are telling. And this has continued for me in other work, in screenplays that I've written, because for the people whose story you're telling, every piece of information is vital, because it's their life and it's their fight and it's their struggle. And so, one tiny phone call or email that they got one day is absolutely vital. And the difficulty then is from an author's perspective and from a director's perspective to say, I know it's vital to you, but I have 2 hours or an hour and a half, and the audience already know it. And so it's a delicate, difficult process. And the ethics for me of, as a writer and as a producer of this kind of work, how you interact and relate with the people whose stories you're telling is of paramount importance in that. But I won't go on about that unless anybody's interested, just because it isn't specifically an answer to your question. But yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Okay, thank you. So are there any other questions? This one.
First of all, thanks for all the sharing from the panels. I really learned a lot about verbatim theater, and I think this question is for everyone, like on the panel, because I can see that most of you guys created verbatim theater. It's about your own country, like the events and the incident which happen in your own country. But as you guys know, like Hong Kong is in a sensitive political situation right now. And I also realized that most of the time when you choose that incident or event, because there's a big argument or there's a debate about it. So what I want to say is, if we wanted to create a verbatim theater, but we felt that maybe it's too sensitive to do it about our own country, is it possible that we do someone else's incident and make the argument? Do you think it's possible? Because you have to do a lot of research about the incident which happened in the other country. So is it going to be so difficult? First thing. The second thing is because the actors on stage is not going to be the people which from that country. So is it going to be not very true on stage to present that incident? So my question is it possible? And what is that gonna make an impact on the audience if it's not presenting your own country's story?
I would say, in fact, Hans has done a lot of work, not just about Germany, and as you can hear in the sections before. So I would say definitely yes. But and as you said, there's got to be huge amount of work you have to do. And yes, I think why not?
Yeah, maybe Phil, any response from Phil about this?
Yeah, I see absolutely no reason why not, and I also think it's a huge amount of work, and then I think particularly in the world these days, people are extremely sensitive about who has the right to tell whose story. I think you're right to pick up on that. And people say, well, you can't, for example, it's only LGBTQ people are allowed to tell LGBTQ stories, and there's debate around that. And I think there are question marks. And then obviously, if it's too sensitive to tell the story based on your own country's experience, but there's a really obvious and clear parallel with the story of another country, then I see no reason why you couldn't use that. But it will be it's a lot of work whatever you do to make verbatim theatre and documentary theatre. But I see no reason why not. And I think provided the parallels are clear, it could be a very effective and useful way of doing it.
Okay. So any other questions or comments? Oh, there's one more.
Thank you for your sharing. It is very amazing to hear all the theater story today. And I'm curious about the ethical decision. As you mentioned that you have select a lot of data and information collected through the interview or the government records or the news media report, and how do you make your moral decision on the data selections, and what is your struggle behind the scene?
For me particularly, and I know there are many people who don't agree with this position, for me particularly, I personally believe that if I'm telling somebody's story, they have every right at any point to have a say on how that story is told. And that's a very difficult and complex decision for me to take. But I felt, particularly with the case of Des and Doreen James, I felt that state bodies and institutions had been, forgive me, but screwing them over for well over a decade. And I didn't want to be yet another person in that list of people who had screwed them over. And so my agreement with everybody who I spoke to was that they would get to see every draft of the play, and they would get to have a say on specifically how the words that the character representing them, what they said and how they said it. And that added to my workload, but it then ended up being that at the end of the day, there was no point when anybody who was included in the play had a problem with what was going on or felt that they weren't being fairly represented. On the flip side of that, when it comes to government reports, government statements, people in positions of authority or who work for institutions, my take is somewhat different in that respect, because I believe that they are that those statements and documents are representations of institutional positions and policy. And provided that those documents are publicly available, and I'm clear that I'm not breaching copyright by using them, then I have absolutely no problem in using those documents any way that I see fit. With the proviso that I don't want to write a one-sided argument. Simply because, as you will all know, state institutions have media departments. They have tens and hundreds of people who work to get their message out to the media. And so it seems ethically fine for me to just use their words, however works for my drama. But I do think there is a moral obligation, if you're telling somebody's story, to include them as part of the process of how that story is told.
Okay, maybe the last questions. Oh, we've got Nick here.
I'd just like to say, Philip, thanks very much for the nice comments. But also, I just wanted to also say that I think you made a huge difference in the Deep Cut case because you stayed with it for so long, and your play made an absolutely enormous difference to the parents who I was in correspondence with after your play because they were so grateful to you for making that play. So you made a real difference to a lot of people personally, and it was a brilliant thing to do. I was interested in the question 2 questions ago because I'm very unsure of the temperature of this room. I don't understand, and I may be straying on some very difficult territory, how much you can do in this country at the moment politically with verbatim theatre. I was here when the umbrella movement happened a few years back, and I wondered how free you are to tackle that and whether it's sensitive, whether you can use public funding to tackle those sorts of issues. And I'd like to open it up a little bit to that area, if I'm allowed to do so. Is that an area we could talk about for a second or two, or is that an area we should avoid? Is anyone in the audience willing to take on and tell me a little about how difficult it would be to do a verbatim play, talking
maybe,
to the
yeah, I can, people? When it comes to my session, maybe I can tell a little bit.
That would be wonderful.
Yes, so,
and for us who are as visitors, I think that would be profoundly interesting.
Yeah.
And it was a good question that arose 2 questions back, and I'd love to hear more about it.
Be patient. I'll talk about it.
Good.
and I can give a little bit respond on this as well. So maybe we just thanks Phil for his sharing, and we hope next time or in the near future you can come to Hong Kong and give us another presentation.
Thank you. It's very kind of you to ask me to speak.
Thank you very much, Phil.
So Phil, you just want to... So he's gone. Okay, maybe so we can shift, and then maybe at this moment I can talk a little bit in response to the question about that. Actually, during the lunch I talked with Greg. I remember the English title of that production now. Actually, the audience mentioned about if someone from the other country, artists from other country, to come and do a verbatim to another with the people in another place. Actually, the first verbatim theatre, claimed to be the first verbatim theatre in Hong Kong, is a show called The Will to Build, which is produced in 2008. Actually, the director and the dramaturg is from UK at the time, is being invited from by the British Council Hong Kong. So my point of view, because I also involved during the interviews in that production. But the problem at that time is the dramaturg and also actually they invited the director from UK, but the director quit in the middle of the devising process due to some personal reasons. And then another dramaturg from UK was invited to join in and keep on the devising process. So the problem is, for the director or the dramaturg from UK, they don't really know much about the history and not much about Hong Kong, actually. Because that production is about the environment, the history of buildings and about architecture and other the city, how we build the city. So at the end, from my point of view, my personal opinion is it is just it didn't go deep into the subject. It's just like people from outside come in and then they ask questions, but only on the very surface. So that show didn't really tackle the problem, why the housing problem in Hong Kong and all the things. It's just like somebody who comes in and talk about, that's why like this, and I see, That's the problem. But really cannot tackle something deep. So I think when you're working with, I don't know, maybe our overseas guests can talk more about the experience to working with people from another country, how to interview them, or how you contextualize them. Maybe if we have time, we can have more sharing. So let's see if we are going to get ready for the next session. Maybe Hoi-fai can talk a little bit as well.
Thanks for staying. And so it's the very last session, and I think I've learned so much today, and I'm really sort of embarrassed because these are all the masters in front of me, and what I have been doing is, well, compared to what they have done, I think it's just teenager or toddler even. So, bear with me, please. And I just want to talk about 3 projects I have done. And I will try to talk less and show more. The first one is, well, I cannot show you anything because the first one is a failure. It's an unborn trial. And in fact, the first verbatim documentary theater piece I want to do is about teenage murder in 1997. Maybe some people in the hall will remember this 同黨秀茂坪同黨燒屍事件. And for the overseas, the real event is that there were a group of teenagers, about 10, and they were living in a public estate, an old public estate, and they were playmates in the very beginning. But then one day, they suspect one of them was being spy and betrayed them, and then they start to torture him, and of course everything got out of control, and this teenager was tortured to death. And then they didn't know, this group of teenagers, they didn't know what to do with the corpse. So they just use a trolley and push the corpse to an empty unit. And at that time, that public estate was nearly empty because it was going to be redeveloped. And there were a lot of empty units. So they put the corpse into the empty unit and try to burn the corpse. But of course, you can imagine the burning also got out of control. And then they were discovered and they were arrested. And it was a big incident, a group of teenagers murdering another teenager. And the reason why I want to do this, in fact, is I learned from the Hoi-fai project. And it was, I want to do it. The timing was 2003. And that was the time when I first heard about this term documentary theater, because a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, who has gone to New York and saw Hoi-fai project. And he was so, he was so, how to say, it was really a great thing for him. And he came back to Hong Kong and told me enthusiastically that, wow, it's such a great play. And he told me, and what's great is the way the Hoi-fai project was being made. And at that time I haven't heard about this term, documentary theater, and nor the way theater can be made in this way. I mean, because before that I was always thinking, there will be a playwright who writes a play, or some people devise something. Devising theater was something we have heard before. But for something like Hoi-fai project, a group of actors with the director went in to interview people, and then from the interviews they put together a show. Wow, I think it was amazing, because at that time Well, the other day, Hans asked me what attracted me to documentary theater. I said it was purely out of boredom. 因為好悶啊，因為 because at that time I found in Hong Kong theatre, from what I have seen and from what I myself was doing at that time, I found there are two extremes. One is, mainstream popular theatre. What they're mostly doing is a comedy and classics, and I didn't see any relationship with the reality outside the theatre. And another extreme is, experimental avant-garde theatre that's even more far away from reality. And so I was so bored about this kind of theatre at that time. So when I heard about this term, documentary theatre, it really blew my mind. And then that's why I started to do this subject. I start to learn, I start to imitate, trying to be a copycat, to imitate Laramie Project without knowing exactly what they are doing. And I just read the script and, at that time, internet was not so popular, so I can only get some little information about how they did Laramie Project, and I try to learn from that, and I try to imitate from that. But you can imagine, as I said, is a failure. It didn't materialize. After 2 years, I get a group of artists, actors, and actors mainly, and I told them about Laramie Project, and I showed them the video, and I said, "Well, let's do something like that." And then but the reason why at the end we didn't make a play was, first of all, when I want to do the play, when I went to that public estate, everything has changed. In Hong Kong, it's like this. When we develop a place, it means that you just trash all the old things and then build new things. And then, I mean, all the things, including buildings and people. So it means that the people who were living there will be scattered around and living somewhere else. So when I went up to that public estate, I can see no one I can interview. And so that's the first thing. And the second thing is I try all my connections, and finally I got indirectly, I got a contact from a youth center which was based in that public estate. And I know that that group of young teenagers were most of the time staying in that youth center. And I got a contact from the headquarters, and I told them I want to do such a project, and can you please help me to try to contact the social worker who's been working with those teenagers? And I got a reply, no, she doesn't want to talk about that incident anymore. And well, and the very last attack, I would say, was I got a contact to the writer of this book. This book is a factual reportage of that incident. I think the writer is a journalist, and I got her contact, and of course I phoned her and said, well, I'm a drama person. I want to do a drama on this incident. Well, after 3 sentences, the reply I get is, 你哋戲劇嗰啲人啊，你哋啊乜都唔諗㗎，你哋淨係諗自己㗎咋，你哋都唔顧下人哋感受㗎。In English, is you drama people, you just don't care about the people. You are just doing whatever for your own good, and then blah 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 blah. And then I was bombarded for 15 minutes, and 跟住就俾人哋鬧咗15分鐘。And but I'm grateful for this incident, because from that I've learned that, first of all, you need to carefully pick the subject. And when you have picked the subject, you need a lot of planning. And you need to be very careful. You need to be sensitive because you are working on a real story. You are working on real people. It's somebody else's life. You can't mess with it. And apart from, other than satisfying your own artistic ego, you need a bigger reason, a better reason to do a documentary theater, I think, to work on a documentary theater work. So you should not just want to satisfy your own artistic ego, and you need a better reason. So that's the first project. And the second project, well, I have something to show then. Finally, I think a few years ago in 2012 and 2013, because the show was first start in 2012, as 2012, it's called Rebuilding 菜園村, 重建菜園村. And then the show was first developed as a 1 hour outdoor performance, but then it was later developed into a more full-length theater performance. It's called Once Upon a Time in 菜園村. For Hong Kong people, of course, you know about the background. I just say a bit about the background for our overseas guests. 菜園村 is, to translate in English, is like a village of vegetable farms, something like that, okay? Yeah. Yes, and 菜園村, in fact, is, in 2009, there was a big incident because there was a big event in Hong Kong because the Hong Kong government want to build high-speed rails to mainland China. And they have to remove this 菜園村, this village, so to make place for the rail stop. And then at that time, a lot of people rally at the Legislative Council, outside the Legislative Council, and try to stop this. And I think it was more than 10,000 people. And yeah, outside the Legislative Council is one of it was one of the biggest number of people before the umbrella movement. And yes, and then, but at the end, it's not successful, and 菜園村 has to be removed. And luckily, after that struggle, the government said that, okay, I give you a new land. Okay, so you build a new 菜園村, you build a new village. And but in the old days, Hong Kong government will never do something like this because they will think that, okay, development is the big thing. You must not be in the way of development. So I give you money, then go. Oh, yes, sorry. The government said that you can find your own land to build your own village, okay? And yes, and so I think that incident was in Hong Kong history a very important incident. So at that time I was thinking of a project to talk about the issue of redevelopment in Hong Kong. And because I think after all these years of development, Hong Kong is the time where we have to face the problem of what kind of development we want. Do we really, in terms of redevelopment, do we want to just take down all the old buildings and then kick the people away and then build the new things? And is it the development we want? And and I found 菜園村 is a very symbolic, it's a very good event for us to think about this issue. So that's why I did the play well, so we interview people, and then we interviewed people from Choi Yuen Chun and from we interviewed people who helped the villagers and who were the politicians who were involved in that movement, and then got the performance. I just want to show a bit of the performance. A few minutes.
文忠，浸會大學助理教授。我哋第一次遊行，2009年11月29號，我記得嗰陣時咧就去咗 Sogo 嗰邊集會。點解去 Sogo 集會就唔去維園咧？咁嗰邊睇起上嚟人多嘛，行嚟行去，咁所以睇起上嚟嗰啲 shopping 嘅人睇起上嚟係示威者，睇起上嚟冇咁難睇喎。邝俊宇，政府落咗個諮詢期。 好離譜㗎！11月11號起諮詢2個月，1月底結束。1月底，我哋嘅目標就係攞夠1萬封反對信。
阿炳，菜園村支援組成員。啲村民有一種好神妙嘅力量啊，即係譬如抗爭啊，一啲好似好 hostile 咁樣嘅場景咁，佢哋好容易會將一啲嘢變得好日常化啊，即係譬如有一次我哋遊行啦。 咁行到去正總，咁衝過個鐵馬，衝過去個玻璃門嗰度，衝嗰陣咧就懶緊張咁嘅，到衝到去坐低晒 settle down， 即係等人哋嚟抬我哋咁啦。咁嗰陣時正總前面有啲石春噶嘛，咁佢哋走咗去踩石。
I just want to give a brief explanation of this piece. It's about because you know before the rally there are a lot of protests going on before the rally, before the final rally in outside the Legislative Council, and the villagers have come out a lot of time to sit and protest and stuff like that. And this part is talking about the experience in protest. Yeah, please continue.
石春咁咯。
結果1月底，樣樣過萬封嘅反對信，我哋送到政府嗰度。點樣回應？我唔記得啦。嗰堆嘢是咪尾成為咗廢紙咯？我記得。咩原因我唔記得啦。類似係格式唔啱啊。總之係一啲 minor 嘢嚟嘅。總之呢1萬封嘅反對信，政府真係視而不見，話唔啱規格啊！ 咁我係一個區議員啦，我嗰陣時做咗1年啦，咁我有咩用？我驚得200-300人，但係最尾嚟咗3000人。冇諗過 Sogo 嗰次集會有人咁多人嚟支持嗰啲反機鐵啊、反高鐵啊嗰啲咁嘅嘢嘅。因為有一大半都係菜園村嚟啦。 因為同菜園村嚟嘅。
You know, well, at that time, I wasn't. Even nowadays, I was not an activist, and at that time, most of the time, when most of the pictures, most of the information I get about this incident is through television, and this is always the image I see in television. You know, they just show you the protesters sitting there and blocking the ways. It seems that they are blocking the way to development, and the policemen are doing the right thing to clear them away. And this is always, you know, in television, in television news, you can just grab this picture for a few seconds.
你作為一個議員，按道理咧，其他地方、其他國家，一個議員係民意授權，然之後應該係一個充權啦 ，empower 咗個能力去幫咗啲弱勢。 完全做唔到嘢喎 ，OK？ 我跟你嘅規矩，跟你寫反對書，又話唔啱規格嘅，跟住叫天不應，叫地不聞。
有一段好長嘅時間，我哋都係咁樣坐喺度阻住佢哋圍板，即係阻住佢哋，唔俾佢哋開工咁咯。有1個月嘅時間，我哋都係咁樣坐喺度，唔俾佢哋開工。咁有一日，我哋坐晒喺度，翹住手，即係。 等 等人哋嚟抬我哋咁樣啦。當時咧，我喺一邊係大曾太嚟嘅，咁我本身遊行啊、衝擊或者俾人抬嘅經驗我會有啦。咁佢會逐個逐個抬你噶嘛，即係逐個逐個扯開你，逐個逐個咁啦。咁我已經一早同大曾太講好咗噶啦，咁佢老人家啊嘛，我唔想佢受傷，我同佢講我話嗱，如果一陣間警察嚟抬我咧，你就放手啦，唔好捉住我啦。萬一要整親你咁就唔好啦。咁佢老人家嚟嘛，啲人唔會抬佢噶，唔敢喐佢噶。跟住佢竟然望住我，然之後同我講話，我係可以放手。跟住佢就真係冇放手。嗰一下我覺得，哇，原來係咁㗎，即係佢真係覺得放手係唔可以㗎咯。
Especially the last bit, you know, the girl in the center, I think maybe you can sense what it's about. It's about that because we talked to an assistant, a helper, a volunteer who volunteered to help the villagers, and she told us about this incident. You know, in once when they were, as usual, they were sitting and there, and they were doing a sit-in and protest, and they are waiting for the policeman to come to clear them away. And she was sitting there, and on her side there was an old villager, about 60-year-old woman. And then, of course, this volunteer was worried that these villagers may get hurt when the policeman came to take them away. So she told her that, okay, so when the policeman comes, so you just lay back and let them take you, okay? And then this woman turned to her and said, no, I can't. Whoa, just this short phrase has told so much. And even when during the interview, during the report of the interview, because when we did the interviews and after the interviews, we have to share with our companies what we have found. And when I heard about this, I thought, well, we've got to put this into the play, because this word, so simple, but it tells so much about her love of her home, about everything, you know. And I think it's important that this performance gave me the experience of. I correct me if I'm wrong. I think somewhere I've read about documentary theater. I think it's from Professor Carol Martin's words, saying that one of the functions is to give the voice to the voiceless. Is it your word? I forget. I don't know. Anyway, and this will stay in my mind, that the power of documentary theater is to give the voice to the voiceless. And I think this incident is a good illustration of this phrase. And you know, this old lady, she won't be able to get coverage in the news. And most of the time, as I said, we can only see the sit-in, and we cannot see the reason why they want to do this sit-in. And from the interview and from our interviews, I really got to understand why they want to do this protest. And so it gave me the confidence to, or it spurred me to do more documentary theater then. And then the next subject, the next show the next piece of excerpts I want to show is 1967. It was about that time when I was doing Chai Yuen Chun once upon a time in Chai Yuen Chun. I want to do a show on 1967 because it's at that time when the umbrella movement was brewing, and as what Hans said in this morning, nothing is happening out of the blue. And the umbrella movement was not happening out of the blue. We Hong Kong people know that there are degree of progression from the Chai Yuen Chun Valley and up to the other incidents in Hong Kong. There is a progression. There is a clear progression, and that time I read from newspaper. The newspaper start to compare the situation before umbrella movement with the situation before 1967, the biggest riot in Hong Kong. And just to give you the figures, you understand how big it is, because the riot was just the reportage of bombs were about 8,000, and more than 1,000 are real bombs, and all the others are fake bombs. And at that time, there were clash of police and civilians nearly all over Hong Kong, and it lasts for half a year. So, well, you see how, in fact, it's an important part of history in Hong Kong, but no one told us about this history. And so I decided, I said, okay, so no one told me, then I've got to do something about it. I've got to use theater to know more about it. And I think documentary theater is the good way for me to know more about it. So that's why I do a play on 1967. Again, I talk to people and try to gather whatever information I can get. And 2 years ago, there were scarce, the information was little. Not like nowadays, because this year is the 50th anniversary, so more and more information about 1967 came out. But 2 and 3 years ago, well, there is little information on this riot. So I talk to people, and then we get the show and show you an excerpt. Okay.
黃建章當時係九巴工會嘅職員，67期間曾經被政治部拘留喺摩星嶺。
Just give you a brief explanation. This is, well, the characters, obviously, they are portraying the interviewees, and also I use some newspaper clippings, so I intercut the interviews and the newspaper cuttings.
出嚟拉人打人啦，於是乎就紛紛起嚟啦，即係鼓動啲人起嚟啊！嗰時啊，個咩咧，佢都組織嗰啲鬥委會嘅，即係各行各業都有嘅喎，即係工商界啊，嗰時我係工會職員啦，工會職員啊。
明報5月3日。人造花廠嘅勞資糾紛，至昨日下午，西環總廠方面已獲局部解決。至於九龍方面，昨日曾一度發生工潮，但係冇意外事件發生。原本資方對今次工潮所採取嘅應付方法係一樣宣布停工，請工人喺昨日下午3時開始返工廠出糧。昨日大有街廠門口曾經出現2張大字報。一張寫有無語錄，另外一張請工友要爭氣，唔好返工廠出糧。但係昨日下午仍然有40多名工友返工廠出糧。喺下午3時多，曾經有一名青年工友手持無語錄喺廠門口召集數十名工友，話要一齊操入廠，向資方質詢係咪出糧之後就永不錄用。但係當時冇一名工友響應。該名手持無語錄嘅青年亦大覺冇癮，轉頭鬆人。至5時多，全體工友自動散去。
曾雄當時係左派工會嘅書記員， 港英同左派雙方啊都有搞大佢嗰個心。咁當然你有個環境先得㗎，有火藥庫但冇嘢去引爆都唔得。你而家試下去搞睇下，叫啲人去咩啊？未必搞得咁大。咁當然當時亦都係處喺社會貪污嚴重，市民生活艱難，工人呢亦都係處喺一個水深火熱，一點就爆㗎嘛。佢哋就去幫手點火。
明報5月5日，一名自稱為明報記者嘅男子喺上午9時，因為拍攝新蒲崗膠花廠嘅現場，同工人發生衝突。一輛警方巡邏車啱啱經過，恐發生意外，即刻報告上峰增援。9時30分，10部警車，包括6部大貨車、4部吉普車，載滿百幾名荷槍實彈嘅防暴隊到嚟，將該處封鎖。有百幾名工人大唱歌曲，念無語錄，情緒激動。部分警員進入人群之中，將一名自稱記者嘅男子護送上警車。事後，工人喺廠門口貼大字報抗議。
文匯報：總管收工離開時，工人代表立即上前與總管談判，質問資方為什麼拒絕談判，為什麼不見工人代表，是否有一意孤行？並且要求資方喺今日上晝12時以前將資方嘅態度答覆，否則就顯示出是資方冇解決事件嘅誠意，一切後果將由資方負責。
明報5月6日下午4時3刻，警察預先將大有街街邊停泊嘅貨車趕走。廠方喺稍後時間有2輛大貨車前嚟送貨，貨車停泊喺花廠嘅後巷。工人於是將貨物搬上去。喺呢一個時候，大概有100名工友自廠外湧入後巷制止出貨，但係廠裏面嘅工人卻大力推出。一時之間，貨物喺人堆之中猜嚟猜去，秩序混亂。廠外工人蕭建輝突然被某管工拳擊胸部，群情馬上鼓噪。
簡先生當時係旺角勞工子弟學校嘅學生。當時港英政府驚左派勢力，佢驚嚟就拉咗幾個阿頭，咁工會人出頭啦。工會出頭嘅時間呢，佢又拉埋工會嗰幾個阿頭喎，又話佢參與暴亂喎，咁火頭就起啦。
糾纏之中，有17人被捕，警察因受包圍，曾經使用警棍。喺混亂之中，有工人受傷流血，有1人被警察由後巷拖過馬路。喺若干嘅被捕人士之中，有人高呼毛主席萬歲，有人大叫打倒資本主義，打倒港英政府，有人被握頸部同埋右腕，仍然高呼語錄，高舉紅色寶書，情況空前激動。
文匯報：新蒲崗人造花廠工人1連2日喺廠門前黐上大字報，喺廠門口高聲朗讀毛主席語錄，高呼毛主席萬歲嘅口號，並齊唱家園歌曲。我們強烈抗議港英當局有計劃、有預謀地製造血腥暴行，要求港英當局立即釋放無理逮捕的人造花廠工人以及工會代表。
喺群眾嘅鼓噪聲之中，大有街一帶有人自上空砸下青馬、玻璃樽、鐵罐等物，向防暴隊襲擊。防暴隊於是分成2中隊，單列，槍嘴向上，以擴音機勸喻。貨車上貨完畢，着陸街嘅防暴隊轉身後撤。剛一轉身，群眾就以石頭、拖鞋襲擊警隊。防暴隊逼得翻身再推進，向黃大仙方向驅散。7點。防暴隊2次打算撤離現場，均無法抽身。8點，防暴隊再增援，再次驅散人群。8點20分，防暴隊全部撤離，留低大批警探在場。喺廠門口仍然集結住好多人喺度睇大字報，但係情況已趨寧靜。
簡太太，當時旺角勞工子弟學校學生。初初咧都係得佢哋被炒嗰幾個工友， 去到中午嘅時候咧，就好多其他廠噶嘛，其他工友咧就去支持佢哋啦。其他工會又組織一啲工友慰問佢哋。我咧就代表學校，我哋嚟慰問下你哋，就係咁嘅啫，冇話物質上嘅支持嘅。嗰日好怪，成個新蒲崗都好靜，除咗嗰堆人，周圍一個警察都冇喎。咁我就話啦，點解一個警察都冇咁古怪嘅？咁我就同啲同學估係喎，可能佢哋去食飯啦。咁我話唔係喎，我哋就喺附近行，成個地方都冇警察㗎喎。咁我就話啦，不如我哋打電話返學校問下老師咯。咁嗰時咧，新蒲崗有間國貨公司嘅，咁我哋咧就去國貨公司度借電話打啦。開頭咧佢都話唔肯借俾我哋㗎，咩事啊咁？咁我哋咪話咯，我哋咧係旺角勞工子弟學校學生啊，我哋咧想借電話打返學校揾老師。哦，咁佢係借咗俾我哋啦。老師啊老師，點解新蒲崗咁靜嘅？周圍一個警察都冇喎。咁我老師就話吓，係咩？咁我就話係啊，真係一個警察都冇啊！即係之前係你係成日都見到好多警察喺嗰度㗎嘛。咁我老師就話吓，係咩？咁你哋要小心啲啦。咁我話我哋而家未埋去啊，佢哋叫我哋去行下，我哋咧去飲杯嘢先。咁我老師就話好啊好啊，咁你哋有咩再打俾我啦。好啊，再見。跟住咧，我哋就去咗飲嘢啦。
一位而家住喺荃灣嘅女士，我嗰時啊住喺新蒲崗㗎，我屋企嘅窗口咧就係對住大有街，就係法西斯個位啊。我嗰時懷孕，望住街上面啲人咧，無端端拿住支旗，唔知點解咁嘈嘅。我嗰時都幾驚㗎。我嗰時住喺啲唐樓4樓，我嗰時返工廠，中午返屋企食完飯又返工。不過嗰日啊，我哋都唔趕返工啦，因為太亂啦。啲人啊，係唔係都拿住支旗喺嗰條爵樓街度經過？明報5月11日午後，新蒲崗大有街人造花廠現場發生大騷動。左派人士同警察對峙6小時。
It's talking about the first major clash between the policemen and the protesters. And, well, most people would define that's the opening of the 1967 riot. And, well, that's the beginning of the, part of the beginning of the play. And yes, so, and to conclude, I think documentary theater really helped me, as one of the American playwrights has talked about documentary theater. He said that Donald Freed, he's an American playwright, and he has remarked about documentary theater that none of us, we can't change the past, but we can determine it, given the range of information that the play intends. So I think this is very eloquently put, that what documentary theater can be, at least for me in this incident. We can't change the past of 1967, but we can determine it. We can determine on how we look at the past. And I think that's important. And I think I will keep on doing it. Okay, so to open for some time to, I'm sorry, I overrun a bit, and to open for some time to discussion then.
Hello. The mic is okay. Come back. Okay, thank you, Mr. Wu. So we have about 5 or 10 probably minutes for questions. So
interesting clips. I was interested to know, because we're trying to reflect the reality. So on that stage, when the actors are trying to perhaps use the verbatim from your interviews, do they have to dramatize, or do you want them to be as real as those interviewees' emotions and things, or do you want to have the dramatic effect, so make it exaggerating or something, doing something more on the stage?
My experience is we are not the interviewers. You cannot pretend to be the interviewers. So I think to catch the essence is important. And yes, and the bottom line is you are not distorting them. Then I think that's the most important thing. Yes, you can highlight, you can use your way to highlight, but you, at least for me, I think you should not distort them. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Mr. Wu, I really enjoy the way in which you use a black box theatre for your production. I think it's a really beautiful production. Thank you very much.
By the way, 1967 is going to be run in October, so
really?
please come.
Yes, I would certainly come and enjoy it again. Based on the excerpts that you have just shown us, I come to understand that there are some theatrical works that you develop. In the process of the development of those two productions, you are inspired by some current affairs, and that was what I come to understand. But my question is, how you would define the uniqueness of the productions as documentary, theatrical productions? The reason why I ask this question is that I want to learn more about the documentary features of the two productions, because I'm not able to see the whole production, in full length. So I really need some help.
If you want to see the whole production, in fact, I welcome you to come to my studio. I can show you the DVD. And sorry, your question is.
So I think she's asking about the definition, or how you define that is documentary theatre.
Well, to be frank, I would say documentary theatre is something I use to ask for funding. Well, from today's talk, you can see that there are many different diversity of approaches to documentary theatre, and I always think that, to me, documentary theatre is it's not a means. I would say it's an awareness of the importance of reality, of the relationship between reality and the theatre, and it reminds us that theatre is something that we can use to engage the reality in whatever way you mean engage. Okay, so as what Hans said this morning, that it's a place that we can give attention to the society, to the theatre, to So I think that's what I'd say.
So it's just a term that to describe something, but usually for funding, marketing, I don't know.
Well, don't tell. HAB person is not here, right? Okay, so yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Oh, the lady. The mic is coming.
By the way, 係講中文都得嘅，其實大家唔介意。
I just want to ask, because you were, I think in the 1967, no, No, sorry. In the other production,
Choi
Yun-chun, yes. The people, the protesters were having their hands and arms together, and I think you described them as something that you have seen in the newspaper about how protesters generally being portrayed as kind of blocking the way. And I wonder, how would you distinguish between what they do in that protest, in that particular context, and with other protests? Because when you say that, that's how protesters are generally being portrayed in the newspaper, I just wonder whether there's anything changing from one protest to the other protest. From that one to, or even to other protests, or the riot in 1967, how would you distinguish that one from what happened in the umbrella movement, for example? Are they the same or are they different?
It's different, of course. I think, yes, definitely it's different, and they are different natures, but you can see the link between them. And I think that's the strength of, at least what I've learned these days, and from Hans and from, I remember because the week before I was in a workshop held by Hans, and I was impressed by a phrase that theater is a place that you can, it's the best place to expose the, correct me if I'm not using the correct phrase, it's the best place to expose the mechanism in the society. And so I think there's, every protest, it's different. And I think theater, well, is good to find the link between them. And to see, as I said, how there's a degree of progression before the umbrella movement. And it's interesting if we can find this link, find this progression. And yes, I hope I answered your question. Okay. Hi.
So there are always two sides of the story. But you are, how you balance, both sides of the story here, or you have your standpoint already. So that's why it affects your decision.
Well, it's questions keep coming back. Okay, so I think that's what is shared this morning. That I think to say balance, or maybe it's not. I will not say balance. I will say you must have your standpoint. Otherwise, how can you decide what to select, what to put on the stage? But your at least for me, I try my best to show you the debate, and then show you how I find the link between all these different events, and hope you can draw your conclusion. You can disagree with me, you can agree with me, that's fine. But I hope I have done my best to show you this linkage.
So that's yes. Why, I want to say, whether you want to tell, whether you show more about, the yellow and the blue. So that's why, you want to tell more about the yellow side, or you want to show the others more about the blue one. So that's why, because, the audience will wonder, whether, you have your own standpoint. Of course, the audience can make their own decision, to see and give a judgment, for that. But as a director or, or an organizer, what are you going to premiere, or present, in front of the audience here? more yellow or more blue. That is what I want to say.
Thanks. Just to give them a bit of context, because in the umbrella movement, when you are yellow, it means that you are pro-protesters. You are blue, it means that you are pro-government. So I would say it depends. For example, like I didn't show it here, I have done another documentary play on verbatim play or ethno drama on real estate agents. I talked to real estate agents and I made a play out of the interviews. And I got criticized that, well, it seems that it's too one-sided. You just tell the voice of the real estate agents. But that's the point, because I want, because their voices are mostly unheard, and most of the time they are demonized. So I want to hear what they say. So I think it comes back what you want to do as an artist. And as long as, if you want to present an overall picture of for example, umbrella movement, of course you should have different arguments from different sides. But if you want to hear how the yellow side comes into, why do they come to the protest, then maybe you should, then there may be no reason for you to include the blue side then. Yeah, just like what Greg said in the morning about the argument between Moises and Lee Fandowski about whether to include the victims, the perpetrator's story. I think it depends on, as Greg said, your underlying question, what you want to ask in the production.
Okay, it's time. We have already past 6 o'clock. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Wu, and thanks for the audience. We still have roundtable and more discussion session tomorrow. So hope to see you tomorrow. And tonight we have masterclass as well. And then also they have 3 new works coming in the coming 3 weeks. So keep an eye on our program, and thank you very much.
I'm sorry, one more thing. This book, it includes the play text of 1967 and 11 other short plays on 1967. It's on sale outside. There will be discount if you buy it now.